What happens when one of country music's biggest legends sits down for what should be a routine morning interview, only for it to spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments in live television history? This is the story of how a simple question turned into a full-blown confrontation that ended with Reba McEntire walking off the Today Show set, leaving millions of viewers stunned and the hosts scrambling to fill dead air. Before we dive into what really went down, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, sharing what you think actually happened, because this one is guaranteed to leave you with questions. Asterisk. The interview began normally enough. Reba McEntire walked onto the set with her trademark smile, waving warmly to the audience as she took her seat across from the hosts. The studio energy was relaxed and welcoming, exactly the kind of atmosphere morning shows are known for. The first few minutes flowed smoothly with questions about her latest tours, her upcoming album, and some lighthearted banter about life on the road. Asterisk. One of the hosts leaned forward with a friendly grin and asked how Reba managed to keep the same energy night after performing for decades. Reba responded effortlessly, explaining that her connection with fans is what keeps her going. Every crowd is different, she said, and she feeds off their energy just as much as they feed off hers. The exchange felt natural, easy, and familiar. Asterisk. A co-host chimed in to compliment her appearance, asking what her secret was to staying so youthful. Reba laughed and credited it to taking care of herself, staying active, and genuinely loving what she does. When you love your work, she said, it shows. Asterisk. Everything seemed perfectly pleasant. Exactly the kind of interview that would normally wrap up with a performance or promotional mention. But then, the tone changed. One of the hosts glanced down at their notes, then looked back up with an expression that felt noticeably more pointed. Asterisk. The host shifted gears, mentioning that Reba had been outspoken in the past about certain personal beliefs, particularly around family values and traditional ideals, but had been quieter lately on major social issues other celebrities were speaking out on. They asked if there was a reason for that. Asterisk. The studio grew quieter. Reba's smile remained, but it tightened slightly. She replied calmly that she believes her music speaks for itself. Her goal, she explained, is to entertain people and bring them joy. Not every conversation, in her view, needs to become heavy or political. The co-host followed up, suggesting that with her platform comes a responsibility to speak out, especially since so many fans look up to her. Reba shifted in her seat and folded her hands neatly in her lap. She exclaimed that her values are clear through her work and how she lives her life, and that she doesn't feel the need to broadcast her opinions on every issue simply because others expect her to. Asterisk. The lead host pressed further, suggesting that silence itself can be a choice and that staying quiet might be seen as taking a side. A pause followed long enough to feel uncomfortable. Reba's expression stayed calm, but her eyes sharpened. She pushed back, saying it was unfair to frame things that way. She wasn't silent because she didn't care, she explained. She was choosing not to turn every interview into a political debate. Asterisk. The co-host attempted to soften the moment, saying they weren't trying to make the conversation political. They brought up discussions about inclusivity in country music and asked Reba where she stood on making the genre welcoming to everyone, especially given her history as a trailblazer for women in the industry. Asterisk. Reba nodded slowly before responding. She said, country music has always been about honest storytelling and real emotion. She made it clear she supports anyone who wants to make great music, regardless of their background. But the host didn't let it end there, suggesting that some people believe the industry and even its biggest stars could be doing more. Asterisk. That's when Reba's smile disappeared completely. Her voice remained calm, but firm. She said she had spent her entire career breaking barriers, working harder than most people could imagine, and doing so with integrity. She stated plainly that she didn't feel the need to justify her actions or her silence to anyone. Asterisk. The co-host tried to de-escalate, insisting they were just having a conversation. Reba glanced between the two hosts and asked if that's really what this felt like, because to her, it felt more like being put on trial. One host laughed nervously and said they just thought it was important to have these discussions. Asterisk. Reba didn't laugh. She replied that if this was the kind of conversation they wanted to reveal, they should have been upfront about it before she sat down. She explained that she came to talk about her music, not to be interrogated about her personal beliefs. Asterisk. By now, the tension in the studio was unmistakable. The hosts exchanged quick glances, clearly not expecting this level of pushback. One of them tried to recover by emphasizing respect for her career and acknowledging that people are paying attention to these issues more than ever. Asterisk. Reba responded steadily, saying she understood that, but what she didn't understand was why. She was being ambushed on live television instead of being asked about her work, as originally agreed. The co-hosts attempted to smooth things over, insisting there was no ambush. Reba cut them off, sharp but controlled, saying that was exactly how it felt. The studio fell silent. The discomfort was palpable. The hosts scrambled to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the damage was already done. One last attempt was made to frame the exchange as an open and honest conversation. Reba looked directly at the host, her expression unreadable. She replied that if they had truly wanted openness and honesty, they would have been transparent about what the interview was really about. Instead, she said, they blindsided her and now seemed surprised that she wasn't playing along. The silence that followed was deafening. Reba, I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot here, the lead host began, trying to regain control of the situation. Let me try to rephrase this. Reba raised her hand, stopping them mid-sentence. She shook her head calmly, but firmly rephrasing wasn't going to fix anything, she said. They knew exactly what they were doing when they asked those questions. They wanted to create a moment and congratulations. They got one. The co-host shifted uncomfortably, attempting to lighten the mood. They insisted they weren't trying to create anything, and only thought it would be interesting to hear Reba's perspective on certain topics. Reba let out a dry, almost bitter laugh and asked who exactly this was supposed to be interesting for. The viewers' ratings? Because it certainly wasn't interesting for her to be put in that position. The lead host tried to take back control, admitting they should have been clearer about the direction of the conversation. Still, they asked if now that they were there, they could at least talk about it, pointing out that Reba had a unique perspective after such a long career in the industry. Reba slowly shook her head. She told them they were still doing it, still trying to push her into a corner. She made it clear she wasn't going to sit there providing sound bites that could be twisted into whatever narrative the show wanted to sell. The co-hosts leaned in with a more pleading tone, emphasizing their respect for her career, her talent, and everything she'd accomplished. Reba's eyes narrowed slightly. If they truly respected her, she said, they wouldn't have ambushed her. Respect means being upfront about intentions. Respect means conversation, not setting a trap. By now. The lead host was visibly flustered, insisting there was no trap and that these were questions many people, especially her fans, had. Reba's voice rose, just slightly, still controlled, but noticeably stronger. Her fans, she said, have supported her for decades. But one thing they don't do is ambush her with loaded questions disguised as casual conversation. The audience was completely silent. Everyone watching could feel the tension. Camera operators hesitated, unsure where to point their lenses. The crew froze as panic spread across the hosts' faces. The co-host tried again, speaking softly, asking if they could pause, breathe, and reset since things clearly started off the wrong way. Reba looked at them for a long moment before replying. The real problem, she explained, was that they believed she owed them answers, that sitting in that chair meant she had to explain her personal beliefs, values, and opinions on every hot-button issue imaginable. She stated plainly that she did not. The lead host quickly jumped in, saying they didn't believe she owed them anything, but that being in the public eye naturally brings questions. Reba responded immediately and sharply. People are free to ask whatever they want, but that doesn't mean she's obligated to answer, especially when those questions are framed the way these had been. Trying to de-escalate. The co-host asked how she would prefer the questions be framed. Reba took a deep breath, clearly working to maintain her composure. She said she'd prefer they not frame them at all. She came to discuss her music, her tours, and what she was there to promote, not to serve as a punching bag for social commentary. The lead host looked genuinely confused and repeated the word punching bag, insisting they were simply having a conversation. Reba's voice turned icy. No, she said. This was a grilling. A conversation goes both ways, but this had been entirely one-sided, with questions designed to make her look bad no matter how she answered. The co-host denied that, saying they weren't trying to make her look bad. Reba leaned forward slightly and asked what they were trying to do, because from her perspective, it felt like she'd been brought on under false pretenses. So the show could score points by putting her in an position on live television. The silence that followed was excruciating. The lead host started to speak, then stopped. The co-host stared down at their notes, unsure how to move forward. Finally, the lead host spoke quietly, suggesting there had been a misunderstanding and that they genuinely wanted a meaningful conversation. Reba's expression didn't soften. A meaningful conversation, she said, requires honesty and transparency. Both sides need to be on the same page about what's being discussed. None of that happened today. The co-host made one last attempt. asking if they could start over and talk about her new album and tour. Reba looked at both hosts, then briefly at the camera. For a moment, it seemed like she might agree. Then she shook her head. No, she said. They couldn't pretend this hadn't happened. What occurred told her everything she needed to know about the true nature of the interview. The lead host's voice grew desperate, reminding her they were live and that millions were watching. Reba replied calmly but firmly that this was exactly the problem. They cared more about the audience than about treating their guests with basic respect. The co-host insisted they did respect her. At that moment, Reba stood up, sending a ripple of shock through the studio. If they respected her, she said, the conversation would have gone very differently. The lead host stood as well, reaching out as if to stop her, asking her to wait and talk. Reba looked at them with disappointment and resolve. They'd already spent 10 minutes talking, she said, and she'd made herself clear. The co-host, now on their feet too, begged her not to leave, promising they could fix things. Reba shook her head. The damage was already done. She replied. They had shown her exactly who they were and what they thought of her, and she wasn't going to sit there pretending otherwise. The lead host was clearly panicking, begging her to stay and offering to discuss anything she wanted, her album, her tour, anything at all. Reba's voice remained steady, final. She appreciated the offer, but she was done. She came on the show in good faith, and that good faith wasn't returned. She excused herself. The co-host pleaded one last time, asking her to think about the fans watching. Reba turned back, her expression softening slightly. She said she was thinking about them and about the example she wanted to set. She wouldn't allow herself to be disrespected just because the cameras were rolling. Her fans would understand. The lead host asked if there was anything that could change her mind. Reba looked at them for a long moment, then shook her head. No, there wasn't. She carefully removed her microphone, unclipping it and placing it. On the chair, the hosts stood frozen. The camera crew hesitated, unsure whether to keep filming or cut away. The entire studio felt suspended in time as one of country music's biggest stars prepared to walk off the set during a live broadcast. The lead host made one final apology, saying they never intended to offend her. Reba paused, one hand on the microphone pack at her waist, and turned back. She said she believed they didn't intend to offend her, but they did intend to put her in a difficult position. And they succeeded. Now, she explained, she was simply choosing how to respond. The co-host's voice cracked as they asked if her choice was to walk off. Reba nodded slowly. Her choice, she said, was to remove herself from a situation that no longer deserved her presence. The situation, Reba said, had become untenable. That was her right, and she was exercising it. The lead host stood there with their mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to find words that might somehow salvage the moment. They acknowledged that she was upset and admitted the interview had been handled poorly, but questioned whether walking off was really the answer. Reba finished removing her microphone pack and set it gently on the table beside her chair. Walking off wasn't the answer she wanted, she explained, but it was the only answer she had been left with. She had been put in an impossible position and was now being asked to remain in it. That wasn't fair, and she refused to do so. Both hosts stepped closer, hands raised in a gesture of appeal. They asked what they could do, right in that moment, to make things right. Reba looked at them with an expression that was tired but resolute. There was nothing they could do now, she said. Maybe they could have made it right before the interview started by being honest about what they wanted to discuss. Maybe they could have fixed it when it became clear she was uncomfortable and backed off. But at this point, the only thing she could do was leave with her dignity intact. The lead host insisted her dignity had never been in question, calling her one of the most respected artists in the world. Reba gave a short, humorless laugh. If that were true, she asked, why was she treated like someone who needed to be cornered and interrogated instead of respected? One of the co-hosts quickly tried to clarify that it was never meant to feel like an interrogation. But, Reba replied, it did feel that way, and intentions don't erase impact. They could repeat all day that they didn't mean it to come across that way, but that wouldn't change how it landed. And she had every right to decide how she responded to that. Visibly stressed. The lead host ran a hand through their hair and reminded her they were live and still had a show to finish. They begged her to sit back down, promising there would be no more difficult questions, just her music, her album, her tours. Reba shook her head slowly. They were still missing the point. It wasn't about difficult questions, she'd answered. Those her entire career. This was about respect and honesty. And once those were gone, they couldn't simply be restored by promises to behave better for the remainder of the interview. The co-host's voice dropped to almost a whisper as they asked if there was truly nothing they could say. Reba looked at them with what might have been sympathy and said she was sure there were many things they could say, but none of them would change what had already happened or make her feel comfortable staying. Asterisk, the lead host, then turned to the camera and asked if she had anything she wanted to say to the viewers watching in real time. Reba paused briefly, then looked straight into the camera. She apologized if this wasn't the interview anyone expected. She had come excited to share her music and connect with people who supported her. But she also wanted viewers to understand that being in the public eye doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. Everyone deserves respect, celebrity or not, and sometimes standing up for yourself is necessary even when it's uncomfortable. Asterisk, the silence afterward was heavy. The host said nothing. Reba continued, explaining that she wasn't doing this for attention or to be difficult. Staying in a situation where she felt disrespected would have been worse than the discomfort of leaving. She then turned back to the hosts, wishing them well and expressing hope that they would learn from the experience and treat future guests the way they themselves would want to be treated. Asterisk, the lead host, found their voice again and said they were learning from the situation in real time, asking her to give them a chance to do better. Reba's expression softened slightly. She said she believed they would do better, but not with her, not today. Today, she was choosing to leave. Asterisk, one of the co-hosts made a final attempt, asking if they could walk her out or speak off camera. Reba considered this briefly, then nodded. They could talk off camera if they wanted, she said, but her decision wouldn't change. Asterisk, the lead host gestured toward the side of the set, but Reba didn't move that way. Instead, she turned back to the camera one final time and thanked everyone who had supported her music throughout her career. She said she hoped they understood why she had to do this. Asterisk, then she turned and walked toward the main exit, the one fully visible to the cameras. The host stood frozen. The lead host called out for her to wait, but she didn't. She continued walking, steady and purposeful. The camera followed her as she crossed the studio floor, gasps rippling through the audience. Slowly, applause began uncertain at first, then growing louder, whether in support or simply in reaction to the moment. Asterisk, a co-host turned to the camera, face flushed, and announced they were going to take a quick break. But the cameras didn't cut away immediately. For several seconds, viewers watched Reba reach the exit, open the door, and disappear through it. Only then did the broadcast finally cut to commercial. Asterisk, when the show returned. Both hosts were seated again, carefully composed but visibly shaken. The lead host addressed the audience, acknowledging that Reba McEntire had chosen to leave the interview. They emphasized their respect for her remarkable career and stated that the conversation had not been intended to go in that direction. Asterisk, the co-host agreed, saying some questions may have come across differently than intended. They explained they had hoped to have a broader discussion about the industry, but had failed to communicate that clearly. The lead host added that the show values all guests and never wants anyone to feel uncomfortable. They promised to reflect on the interview and improv going forward. The co-host reiterated their admiration for Reba, calling her an icon and a legend. Asterisk, finally. The lead host glanced at their notes and attempted to move the program along, teasing an upcoming cooking segment. But the damage had already been done. Asterisk, social media exploded almost instantly. Clips of the walk-off spread at lightning speed. Viewers took sides, debated who was right, and analyzed every word. Some praised Reba for standing her ground and refusing to be cornered. Others criticized her for walking away from tough questions. Many blamed the hosts for ambushing a guest. Asterisk, what was meant to be a routine morning interview had instead become one of the most talked about moments in live television, one that left viewers questioning where the line between conversation and confrontation truly lies.